used big time by the fake news media. The president is absolutely right about this. Years ago.
Welcome to America This Week. I'm Eric Bowling. America This Week. This show is all about holding the mainstream media and the powerful accountable by following the money and asking the tough questions they're just not used to being asked. The U.S. economy is growing at such a fast clip and the unemployment rate is so low that there must be something wrong, right? I mean, after all, the economists and pundits told us we were headed for a recession because of Trump. Instead, we have a scorching 3.2% GDP growth combined with a 3.8% unemployment rate across all demographics. That's what we call a Goldilocks economy. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. Meanwhile, take a look at across the globe and the picture is downright grim. The European Union is struggling with a paltry 1.5% growth rate, less than half of what ours is. While our wages are growing at the fastest pace in a decade, in Europe, thanks to asphyxiating taxes, burdensome regulation, and employment rules that crush the spirit of businesses, wages have stagnated. In fact, Europe is bordering on socialism, and it's failing there. Meanwhile, about the same distance from Miami to Chicago, fly south, and you land in Caracas, Venezuela. Socialism is failing right in front of our eyes, folks. Venezuelan tanks rolling over Venezuelan citizens, lines for food, lines for gas, no medical supplies. It's an economy which is DOA. And that is sad given that Venezuela has the world's largest proven oil reserves. Number one, more than Russia, more than Iran, and even more than Saudi Arabia. Trump should invest in Venezuela. We could bring back their once thriving oil industry with ease, but I highly recommend we invest in Venezuela and not just give them handouts. Give a person the fish, she eats for a day. Teach her how to fish, she eats for life. Socialism can be defined as government running businesses, high taxes, mandated wages, and lots of free stuff. On paper, sounds great until the money to pay for all the free stuff runs out. Then this happens, folks. Socialism has always failed its people. We should embrace the free market, embrace the current economics of low taxes, scale back regulations, and by all means, get government the hell out of the way. Free market capitalism is coming through. But hey, that's just my 2 cents. And we are fortunate to have a great friend of mine, Kellyanne Conway, back to join us on America This Week. Thank you so much for the new show. Kellyanne, thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. You've been a wonderful person to us. We appreciate that. Kellyanne, the news of the day, William Barr, Attorney General Barr, on the Hill, on the stand in the Senate Judiciary Committee, giving them a hard time, at least on the Democrat side. What are they going for? What's their end goal?
I think many of these people are actually angry at Bob Mueller and his investigators for not producing the goods that they expected and anticipated, which is a criminal referral of the president or his family members, associates. No crime. You can't charge a crime where no crime exists. And that is the ultimate conclusion of the Mueller report. If there was criminal conspiracy, some called it collusion for 2.5 years straight, or any other type of crime, then that would have been charged. It is the job of a prosecutor not to use words like exonerate. It's not the job of a prosecutor to prove someone's innocence. It's the job of a prosecutor to prove someone's guilt and actually refer or decline indictment. And that was declined here. There's a declination. But they want to get through the back door by harassing Bill Barr, the president's attorney general, why he put out this 4-page memo. He made very clear in his testimony today, the 4-page memo was akin to a verdict. You read the verdict, here's what the verdict says, and then you'll see the transcript, aka the Mueller report. Now, I can see if all we ever saw was the 4-page memo, Eric, the 448 report is out for all to see. It's there. Bob Mueller and his team of investigators actually say in that report that they had no interference of the Department of Justice to do their jobs. They got every paper. They got over 1 million pieces of paper. They got 500 witnesses, 2,800 subpoenas, 13 foreign registers. I mean, pen register. We just went on and on and on in this investigation. $30 million of taxpayer money. This is the definitive, conclusive, nonpartisan investigation.
Nicole Wallace over at NBC basically said that William Barr was running a forward defense for the president.
There's just no evidence of that. Again, they're angry with Mueller. and they're taken out on Barr. There's no evidence that people should be impugning the reputation, character, and integrity and competence in this case of the Attorney General Bill Barr. If anything, Mr. Barr is testifying, and he is able to say, here is why we reached our conclusions. Here is what the Mueller report said. And he clarified something very important today. The Washington Post overnight ran this story that everybody jumped on. Here it is, and Adam Schiff, Bill Barr must resign. Why people still put him on TV when he has zero credibility? He said, we have evidence of collusion in plain sight. I was the first to call for his resignation. Every single Republican on his Intelligence Committee, ironically named, has called for his resignation. But they still give this man a platform who lied for 2.5 years about evidence of collusion. So what they did with the Washington Post report is say, aha, Mueller called Barr to express his displeasure with the memo. No, Barr said today under oath that Mueller, the conversation with Mr. Mueller was Mueller's concern with the media coverage of the memo. And that actually I thought Barr said something very important at the beginning of the questioning today, Eric. Attorney General Bill Barr noted that because of the media frenzy, because you had, quote, former government officials on TV saying that the president and his family members would be indicted, would face criminal charges, he felt duty-bound to get out a summary as fast as he could ahead of the redacted report being released. He said because of, he's too polite to say, people lying on TV and presuming that it was going to be bad for the president, bad for his family, bad for his senior staff members, that he had to get ahead of that and say, folks, calm down. There is no collusion here. There was no conclusion on There's no conclusion on obstruction in the Mueller report, but that the Deputy Attorney General, who was confirmed 93-7 by the Senate 2 years ago, the Attorney General and the Office of Legal Counsel all concluded no obstructive conduct.
And that's where it should be concluded, not within the investigation.
Well, Lindsey Graham said that. He's the chairman of the committee, and he said, I'm done here. I read the report.
Your thoughts on 3 separate Democrats running for president on that committee grilling Barr?
But we saw it with what they did to Brett Kavanaugh. It's the same thing. There'll be Kamala Harris and Cory Booker and Amy
Should they recuse themselves in these types of
Oh, no, I like when they talk. I think it's fabulous, and it's probably why they're tied with a margin of error in most polls, because people see them for who they are, harassing good people and witnesses. I think some of the questioners should go under oath and not just those being questioned. Wouldn't that be fun?
That would be interesting.
That would be fun. Maybe we'll get a rule change. But in their case, remember the I am Spartacus moment. I thought actually Cory Booker showed great restraint, not just saying I'm Jesus, when she acts like most of the time. He's at 3% or something, 2% in the polls, in most polls. I don't know what his problem is with all the women running. Why doesn't he just step inside and say, you know what, the Democratic primary electorate just doesn't like me for president. I think I'll be so pro-woman, I'll support one of the women. Why isn't he supporting Joe Biden, the vice president, whom he served alongside of for 8 years?
Why isn't former President Obama supporting Joe Biden?
Well, the media let Joe Biden get away with his first big lie, if we're tallying them up, when he said, I asked President Obama not to endorse me. Big question, was that before or after you realized he was not going to endorse you? We know that you're accepting endorsements. You accepted the endorsements of the firefighter management, the rank and file, or another story. And we also know that you're trying to tie yourself to President Obama as much as you can, because you're using President Obama's remarks in a new ad. Those remarks are several years old at a medal ceremony. So the media just don't follow up. They don't say, hey, how are you going to rebuild a middle-class economy that actually President Trump has already rebuilt, because we inherited a big mess for the middle class, owing in fact to Joe Biden's 8 years as vice president.
I want to thank my good friend Kellyanne Conway. Before you go, can you swing it around and check out the media gaggle as waiting on our good friend Kellyanne, who was nice enough to give us a one-on-one.
You got the one-on-one.
We got the one-on-one. Kellyanne, thank you so much.
All the best. God bless you.
Best to the president as well.
You got it. I'm glad you got that great interview with him. He was really excited. Thank you.
And now we have so much to discuss. Joining me now, Democratic strategist Jonathan Harris and former Deputy Assistant to President Trump and host of America First, Dr. Sebastian Gorka. Doc, let's start with you. I want to go back to the monologue. I rolled some footage of what's going on in Venezuela. You, for a long time, have pointed out the obvious weaknesses of socialism and communism. What's going on there? Should we even be involved there?
Well, I think we need to remain what Reagan said we need to be, which is the shining city on the hill, an example of how self-determination and representative republics should function. It's what Ambassador Bolton has said since the beginning of this crisis. We'd like the Venezuelans to get a system that represents them, not to live in a dictatorship. Your monologue was great, and it's like Maggie Thatcher said. I grew up under Maggie in the UK. Socialism is great until you run out of other people's money, and that's what they've done to the richest country in the hemisphere, as you said, more oil than Saudi Arabia. Last year, the average Venezuelan lost 25 pounds because they're being starved by their regime.
John, I'm going to probably agree with you on this issue. I don't know what John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, has in mind when he says we're going to back Guaido instead of Maduro. I just, why do we get involved in these things? It didn't work out for us in Syria. It rarely works out for us when we start picking winners.
Exactly. I don't understand how we can kind of mount an argument of, our election was interfered with, our pure democratic process, and then try to go over there and say, let's interrupt their pure democratic process. They chose their leader, and whether we like that leader or not, that is their elected leader, and we should allow them to sort it out without our interference.
Adolf Hitler was chosen. Do we say Adolf Hitler's cool now because he was chosen?
Is democracy democracy?
No.
Is democracy or not? Do we pick and choose who we interfere with?
We didn't pick anybody.
Right,
we said that the Venezuelan people chose Guaido, who has been chosen, has not been allowed to take office. The nations of the Latin American world, with two exceptions, have said he is the rightful leader. When you've got countries like
you're suggesting that Maduro was not
when you've got countries like Iran, North Korea, and Russia backing Maduro, that's the only metric you need.
That's not the metric you need. You need the metric of they voted for Maduro. Also, I do think it's interesting that you're lashing out at somehow socialism and ignoring the fact that we have imposed crippling sanctions on them since the summer of 2017, and that they have studied these sanctions and that they have possibly led to the deaths of 40,000 people in an effort to target their oil, which you pointed to, and oust their leader. You can blame socialism all you want because that's a right-wing talking point.
I get to lash out at socialism because my father was arrested and tortured and imprisoned by socialists. So guess what?
So
I get to lash out because I have credentials more than you do because I know the reality. The reality of socialism.
The facts of the situation don't give you credentials to lie about a situation in Venezuela.
Did you
just call me a liar?
You are lying about the situation in Venezuela.
What did I say was a lie? Name the one thing I said that was a lie.
Can I speak?
Say it.
Literally,
what was it?
You tried to blame socialism for what is happening.
I didn't lie about it. I
yes,
said it's a socialist nation. Is it a socialist nation?
If you're going to...
Is it a socialist nation?
Can I finish?
Yes or no?
If you're going to skip over the fact that we have imposed... Are you going to? You did skip over the fact that we have... I'm trying to tell you, but you don't seem to want to let me speak. The sanctions in Venezuela that we have imposed have crippled their economy and cost 4,000 lives.
Blame America for a dictatorship.
Well,
did I blame them for a dictatorship or our own sanctions?
I'm trying to be fair and balanced about this. Jonathan, I agree with you. We shouldn't get involved in these issues. But let's be honest. Socialism created the problems in Venezuela, not American sanctions.
I will try to be fair, and I'll try to say that perhaps maybe socialism hasn't helped, maybe. But there's no data to show that. But there is clear data to show that 40,000 deaths have been caused by our sanctions.
Or the economic failure of socialism.
That the Trump administration targeted their oil economy.
One government that's ever thrived under socialism for a period of time.
I can't, but I guess my friend is going to say that I'm a liar. 40 nations have tried socialism since 1917. Every single one has failed. 100 million people have died. 100 million people.
Clearly not going to solve the problem in Venezuela right now, but we shall try maybe again very soon. Ahead on America This Week.
It's insiders and an outsider. We have an outsider president. The intelligence agencies are riddled with insiders, neocons, who didn't vote for Donald Trump.
Coming up, my exclusive interview with Roger Stone. We'll be right back. Will Trump be back in 2020, or does he have another candidate in mind? Stay tuned.
Well, it is music magic on the Las Vegas Strip tonight. We're talking, of course, about the much celebrated 2019 Billboard Music Awards just hours away, and you can catch it right here on Channel 3.
So, of course, we had to be there for the red carpet, and that is where we find our Marie Mortera with a look at the action you won't see anywhere else. A lot of fun happening behind you if you've been watching.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we're here on the red carpet, and the celebrities are making their way down the red carpet right now. Scott, if you could just go ahead and show this gorgeous setting here. Now, outside of these gates, we have been hearing fans screaming every time someone big makes their way through. So we know that they will be here. We just haven't quite seen any of them just yet. But let me tell you about the show before the show, the one that I got to see yesterday when I was just making my rounds here at the MGM, a glimpse into the celebrity treatment, into a very special night, one that Las Vegas will not forget. Cheers.
Sandwich holder. And then egg white.
Okay, so first, the official Billboard Music Awards Raffi Gift Bag Lounge. Artist Raffi was there to show off the sweet treats, and you know, you got to look good on the red carpet, right? So the bags, they are coming with pampering from the inside and out, a concoction of vitamins and supplements, even access to a vegan chef, his jewelry, and what do you need when a selfie just won't do? A bespoke image by artist Cristobal.
These were both handmade by the artist, and it was like, wow. When they told me about what he's gonna do, I was like, okay. But when it came here, and I'm an artist myself, I truly appreciate it and said, that's amazing.
So Cardi B, before we actually see Cardi B
live,
that's right. That's right, and then behind the scenes on stage, how about Las Vegas's youngest stars? I got to meet a group of local singers joining a special performance tonight at the Billboard Music Awards. Now we can't...
And now to our exclusive interview. I sat down one-on-one with Roger Stone. The man has been in politics for 40 years. Watch. Roger Stone, thank you for joining us. It's the big seat. It's the interview seat. We've had President Trump in there. We've had Steve Bannon. Now we have Roger Stone. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
I want to start with something that was shocking to a lot of Americans when they saw the raid on your home, your private residence in Florida. Tell us about that.
Well, I think many Americans saw 29 FBI agents raid my home. That very same day, I pled not guilty to all charges. I vowed a vigorous, aggressive legal defense. I believe I will be vindicated at trial.
And you have pled not guilty
to all charges, and I believe I will be acquitted on every count. I must say that it's been a challenge because the 2 years of fake news allegations that I would be indicted for treason or conspiracy or Russian collusion has destroyed me financially. And mounting a legal defense like this can cost as much as $2 million. People who want to help me can go to stonedefensefund.com. But I have pled not guilty. I will go to trial, and I will be vindicated.
Were you surprised by the firepower that showed up that early morning?
Well, as you know, I am enjoined by the court from discussing any aspect of the case. I think CNN so thoroughly aired it that everybody in America saw it. I'll just leave it there.
Okay, let's start with your life, Roger. You're a fascinating character. 19 years old, you're working on Nixon campaign. Tell us about that. What got you into politics so young?
Well, I was a Goldwater zealot. A neighbor had given me a book on Barry Goldwater, The Conscience of a Conservative. I worked as a volunteer in his campaign. I was 12 years old. And when he lost, I was very disappointed. I began studying the 1960 election, and I determined that Richard Nixon had been both a better candidate than Barry and that he had been cheated. So I wrote him a letter at his New York law office telling him if he ever ran again, I wanted in. Of course, they didn't know I was a kid. And 2 years later, when I was about 16, I was called for an interview and I got a job as a gopher for John Mitchell. That later parlayed itself into being the youngest member of the committee to re-elect the president. And therefore, to this day, I'm a Nixon man. I think that he's underrated as a president.
What made you tattoo his image on your back?
It's his resilience. It's not a political statement. It's our daily reminder that in life, when things don't go your way, when you get knocked down, when you suffer defeats, when you think you're finished and you're disheartened and you're disappointed and discouraged, you have to get back up the canvas and fight. It's a story of resilience. It's a story of persistence. That's what I admire about Richard Nixon. Look, I think strategic arms limitations with the Soviets, saving Israel in the Yom Kippur War, has to be balanced with closing the gold window and the ignominious racist failure of the war on drugs. I see the balance in his presidency. I see both greatness and flaws.
You're leaving one out, though. You were leaving Watergate out.
Yes.
It defined his presidency, his legacy. But let me ask you, forget Watergate. We don't want to rehash what happened at Watergate. What I want to know is, in the aftermath of Watergate, presidential powers were scaled back. They were pinned back dramatically. So for 45 years since then, presidents have been reluctant to use some of those presidential powers. Has Donald Trump turned the corner and said, time has changed, things have changed, I can use these presidential powers again?
Well, in all honesty, Barack Obama gave him the opening to do that. Barack Obama did a number of things through executive order. So did George H.W. Bush, interestingly enough. But now I think Trump has taken it to a new level. I think everything he's done is constitutional. You see the courts fighting him, but he's using the powers that the Constitution gives him.
You've been known as a kingmaker. There are people who would say you helped Nixon get elected, Reagan get elected, George W. Bush get elected, possibly Donald Trump get elected. Who made Donald Trump the politician?
Donald Trump made Donald Trump. See, there is no Karl Rove in Trump world. Trump's not a politician. He's a political figure. He really marches to his own drummer. He decides what he's going to say. He decides where he's going to go. He decides who he's going to meet with. Now, that doesn't mean he's not open to advice. He'll ask you 1,000 questions, and he'll take into consideration what you say. But at the end of the day, he's not a guy reading talking points written by somebody else. He's very much his own man, and that breaks the mold. Most of our politicians are coached and managed and handled. Nobody coaches or manages or handles Donald Trump.
You've been with him quite a long time, since the 80s.
I wanted him to run for president in 1988, in 2000, in 2012.
Tell us a little bit about that whole, you helped George Bush out by eliciting the help of Donald Trump, yes or no?
In 1988, yes.
Tell us what happened. It was going to be another Ross Perot situation. You were trying to get the Reform Party. Is that who it was?
You're speaking of 2000.
Yeah.
Ross Perot and then Governor Jesse Ventura both encouraged Donald Trump to run for the Reform Party nomination. Because Perot had run so strongly, the Reform Party nominee was entitled to $38 million of public money, OPM, other people's money. Trump, the businessman, saw that opportunity immediately, and he explored it, although I think he would tell you today I wanted him to do it more than he did.
Because you wanted Buchanan out of the race so that, or do what you were going to discredit Buchanan so that George Bush could have a better chance.
Look, no one will think I'm a Bush Republican or I was doing this for Bush. I was doing it for Trump because the other two candidates to me were lacking. In the end, Donald Trump correctly decided you can only be elected president in this country as a Republican and Democrat.
So he's with you. You're with him for 30-some years, almost 40 years. And then as he's very close to becoming the nominee, you separate. Were you fired or did you quit? And why after so long?
Well, the point is, I quit. He said I was fired. I don't want to fight about it. I went out and I think I was very effective on his behalf in the general election. Speaking, writing, I published a book, The Clintons' War on Women. I made several documentaries that were widely seen. So I think I was a very effective advocate without being in a campaign structure. And I have remained loyal to the president and will remain loyal to the president.
You know, there was a line attributed to you. You said never underestimate the value of disinformation. What do you mean?
Well, I think that disinformation is punched out every day in the fake news. CNN puts it out every day. MSNBC puts it out every day. And it does affect people. It does change opinions. It does mold opinions. And therefore, it has to be taken into consideration.
Roger, some have said you are the king of the use of disinformation.
No, I never use it myself.
Well, I heard a story about it when you were a young man, 5 years old or something.
It's true. When I was in 1960, I was for John F. Kennedy. Largely because he had better hair than Nixon. I didn't know much about politics, and they were having a mock election in my elementary school, and therefore I spread the rumor that if Nixon was elected, there would be school on Saturdays. And of course, it worked. This is where I learned the power of disinformation. Of course, I've never used it since then.
Is it being used now? Is 2020 going to be about information, policy, or disinformation?
Well, it's being used big time by the fake news media. The president is absolutely right about this. I read stories about myself that right now I'm enjoying from responding to that are either recycled fabrications that I've answered months and even years ago, or they're new fabrications, and I just have to wait till an appropriate time to address them.
You know, Black Manafort Stone, big lobbying group, made a lot of money as well. What was that all about?
We had three partners who had specific areas of expertise. This is where I first represented Donald Trump. All of my clients, by and large, were domestic clients, most of them in the gaming sector. That's what I specialized on. The other partners had their own areas of expertise.
President Trump and his intel community, what's that relationship like? How does he go towards 2020 re-election with such an animosity with the intel community right now?
Well, I think it's a mistake to look at our politics as Republicans versus Democrats. That's not really how it breaks down. It's insiders and an outsider. We have an outsider president. The intelligence agencies are riddled with insiders, neocons, who didn't vote for Donald Trump.
So someone call you, and they have called you, a dirty trickster. I've realized in 18 years covering politics is a blood sport. It's you gotta be ready to play every day. I don't think dirty is the right word. I think you're an effective trickster. Is that fair?
Well, what I object to is when they say Roger Stone self-described dirty trickster. I've never described myself that way. Other people have. I actually finally got the LA Times to print a correction about 2 weeks ago, but it still pops up in the New York Times and the Washington Post. Politics ain't beanbag, and you can call me any name you want, but I haven't done anything that is outside the norms or broken the law that my contemporaries have not done. Yeah, this is a contact sport in America. It always has been.
If a Democrat were to ask you to help him or her beat Donald Trump in 2020, would you sign up?
No, not a chance.
If Donald Trump wins in 2020 and 2024, who would you back? I think you've actually said a political piece of horse meat that I could ride to a presidency, describing someone I want to get into, but who would be that next one?
Well, I think that the election of Trump has broken the mold. Prior to Donald Trump, you had to be a general or a U.S. senator or a governor to become president. Now, I think because of the rise of the alternative media and the importance of the pop culture, you have to be well known to run for president, and you have to meet a kind of a minimum standard of qualifications. I'd like to see another business person follow Donald Trump. I do, but I'm not prepared to tell you who.
I'm going to let you go. Roger, it was always good to meet you and good to sit down with you. Thank you for your time in the interview chair. Thank you, sir. All right, ahead, we'll take a pulse of America. We have new details about a smuggling ring in Texas, including its alleged ties to terrorism and the specific ways the group tried to get into the country. That's coming up next.
The row between the United States and Russia over the situation in Venezuela is continuing to heat up. Now, the U.S., for its part, of course, is saying that it believes that Russia is meddling in the United States' backyard. Senior American officials have warned the Russian Federation to stop its support of the Maduro government and have also accused the Russians of preventing Nicolas Maduro from leaving power and also leaving the country. Now, the Russians are having none of that. They're shooting straight back at the United States, saying that they believe that it's the Americans who are meddling in the domestic affairs of a sovereign country, as the Russians put it. Now, there was a phone call on the level of the foreign ministers between Sergei Lavrov and the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. We have the readout from the Russian side, and they are saying, and this is a quote, "It was stressed by the Russian side that Washington's interference in the internal affairs of a sovereign state, the threat against its leadership, is a gross violation of international law. It was indicated that the continuation of aggressive steps is fraught with the most grave consequences." So you can see how the rhetoric between these two countries is heating up. The Russians, of course, for their part, are accusing the United States of openly supporting the opposition and wanting to implement regime change in Venezuela. Of course, the American government has said that they believe that Juan Guaido is the legitimate interim president of the country and has said that they want Nicolas Maduro to leave power as fast as possible. The Russians absolutely sticking with the Maduro government, still very much favoring Maduro. Of course, the Russians do have very strong relations with that government, both economically and militarily as well. Fred Pleitkin, CNN, Moscow.
A difference simply by their love of the green and gold. The Packers, along with the Atlanta Falcons and Seattle Seahawks, were chosen to take part in the Fan Fearlessly campaign put on by American fans.
Let's take the pulse of America. This segment offers something no one else can give you. Distinctive coverage from our vast network of Sinclair stations all across the country. A Jordanian national has pled guilty to smuggling men from the Middle East into Texas across the southern border. He was caught smuggling 6 men from Yemen, which is a hotbed of terrorist activity. Joe Galley from Sinclair station KABB in San Antonio joins us live with the details of this smuggling ring. Joe, what's the latest?
Eric, the one thing that the Justice Department would not confirm is whether or not Moyad Mohammed al-Deri or the 6 Yemeni men who tried to get across the border had direct connections with terrorist groups. Yemen, as you know, is a hotbed for groups like al-Qaeda. The way these men were able to get across the border was by traveling from Yemen to Saudi Arabia and then flying to places like Ecuador and then traveling by land to Monterrey, Mexico. That's where al-Deri's home base was. He would then take them to the border near South Texas, and according to his plea agreement, al-Deri then disguised those men as construction workers, and they went into the Rio Grande River and attempted to sneak into the country. The area that they were coming across doesn't have a wall or any other physical barriers. Border Patrol told us that the roads in that area aren't even well maintained, and it's hard for them to do patrols there. Federal officials say this arrest should be a wake-up call for the nation to see just how easy it can be for dangerous people to come across our southern border.
It stands to reason generally that if we have an open border where people from countries with large terrorist presences that would like to inflict harm on this United States can just walk across the border and skip all of the vetting and checks we do when people fly into this country, eventually someone is going to take advantage of that.
Border Patrol told us that their staff is overwhelmed with asylum seekers and they're not able to be in the field as much as they would like in order to catch smugglers. Border Patrol says there needs to be changes in the asylum process to free up their agents so they could do their jobs.
Joe, the Border Patrol suggested changes to the asylum system, but did they also suggest a wall would help?
They said that they definitely need to have physical barriers, especially in places where they know that people are coming across. I've gone and done a lot of reports specifically right in the spot where these 6 men were coming across, and there's really nothing there. And if you know that there's an opportunity where no one's watching, it really wouldn't take much time to be able to swim right across the river and get into this country.
Joe Galley, thank you very much. KABB in San Antonio. Thank you. We're joined now by my new colleague, Lara Logan, who is joining us here at Sinclair Broadcast Group as a special correspondent. Lara, welcome. Tell us what you've been up. By the way, welcome. We are thrilled to have you, one of the premier journalists of our time. Tell us what you've been up to.
Well, I've not had a lot of sleep, I'll say that. We've been all over the border. We were down in McAllen and Laredo and El Paso and also all the way into Cochise County, Arizona. So we have, my producer's a little bit of a hellraiser, and he doesn't let us sleep much.
What are you exactly exploring? What are you exposing? What are you finding?
Well, you know, the interesting part about this is that when you go to a battlefield, right, you go into a war, you go into a tsunami, natural disaster, you kind of, everybody knows what you're going into. What's unique about the border and covering this story, and I've been doing this for more than 30 years, right, is that, first of all, we had to figure out what was really going on, because you have one side of the political divide that says there's no crisis, and the other side says there is a crisis. So what is the truth? That was really the first order of business. And overwhelmingly, you know, that became very obvious in a short amount of time, just talking to the people who are living through this every minute by minute. And so what we really tried to do, our mandate was go forth and report. There was, you know, that's it, no interference. I mean, it really is about reporting what you find.
Isn't it amazing the wide expanse of places that you can cross the border with ease?
It doesn't end. It's really quite extraordinary. And yes, the terrain is challenging. Of course, the conditions are challenging. But I always love when people say there's no solution to something, right? Because, I mean, it's just, historically, it never works out that way.
Are you getting in to talk to these people, the ranchers, the people who live on the border, and get their opinion, what they think?
You know, the way we always work, Eric, and I do my job the same way here that I did it at 60 Minutes, I did it at a newspaper in South Africa. We talk to everybody. We listen to everybody. You go with an open mind and an open heart. And nobody owns us, right? We're not going to carry water for anybody. We're going to report what we truly believe is the truth.
Speaking of those reports, when do they start?
Well, that's a very good question. Next week. They start next week.
Fantastic, fantastic.
So, a whole lot of work between now and then, but we'll get it done.
We cover the border quite extensively on this show, so we'll definitely love to have you back soon.
Thank you, because there's a lot of people who want this story to be told.
Lara Logan, thank you very much. And in America This Week exclusive, an alleged terrorist group planning an attack on the U.S. government. That plot uncovered last year. Now we're learning there's an Alabama connection to the terror suspect's arrest at a desert compound in New Mexico. Andrea Ramey with Sinclair station WPMI in Mobile has the details.
Last August, authorities raided that compound and found a stash of guns, emaciated children, and the remains of a missing 3-year-old boy. Federal prosecutors say 5 suspects living at that compound were planning and training for deadly terrorist attacks on American soil. Now, newly discovered evidence connects small-town Alabama to this alleged terror plot. Outside Tuskegee, down this desolate dirt road, federal investigators suspected possible terroristic activity right in our own backyard. NBC 15 News uncovered a heavily redacted court filing connecting this property to an alleged terrorist training camp 1,400 miles away in New Mexico.
Authorities say they discovered a compound hidden by walls of tires and wooden pallets. Police called the suspects Muslim extremists.
Says that he was being trained to conduct jihad. Using clues from this cryptic court filing, we found land records showing this Alabama property is owned by accused terrorist Siraj Wahaj. The FBI says Wahaj and 4 others were plotting terrorist attacks against the government. They were all arrested last year at this compound in northern New Mexico. They've all pleaded not guilty to federal terrorism, kidnapping, and firearms charges. A recently unsealed federal search warrant says it's on this 2-acre Tuskegee property that the terror suspects built a second compound.
That's shocking.
Line by line, we went through the federal search warrant here in Alabama and found the items discovered on the Macon County property mirrored those recovered in New Mexico. There's all these wood pallets stacked up over here, and it looks like there's some type of structure made from the wood pallets and plastic sheeting. If you keep moving onto the property, there's dozens of these blue buckets. From the air, you see more clearly what the FBI described in its search warrant as a military-style obstacle course. The FBI believes the group spent at least several weeks here.
It is very scary.
We also found tires, trash, children's toys, and these respirators.
I wouldn't think no terrorists here, but you never know.
Federal authorities appear to have made the Alabama connection with this group back in December 2017, when Siraj Wahaj crashed his 2004 Ford Explorer on I-65 in rural Chilton County, Alabama, about an hour and a half away from the compound. The FBI says there were 5 guns in that car, a bulletproof vest, and a bag of ammunition. Investigators say Wahaj and a friend were allowed to remove the firearms from the Explorer into a box truck. They told police they were going camping 1,400 miles away in New Mexico. 8 months later, the desert compound was raided. Days after their New Mexico compound was raided, the remains believed to be Siraj's young son, Abdul Ghani, were found there. Investigators say the 3-year-old was kidnapped from Georgia by his father. Investigators believe he was killed during a religious ritual. In Mobile, Andrea Ramey. Back to you, Eric.
Thank you, Andrea, and WPMI Mobile, Alabama. There are also renewed terror concerns worldwide after a series of attacks both here in the U.S. and abroad. What are the reasons and what is law enforcement trying to do to stop terror? Chief Political Correspondent Scott Thuman now with a look at the growing threat to our safety and security.
Losing ground in Syria and Iraq, ISIS and those inspired by the terror group are taking a toll elsewhere. The latest scare in Los Angeles, where the FBI says a 26-year-old Army veteran who'd recently converted to Islam plotted to set off an explosion at white supremacist rallies.
Sometimes we get asked what keeps you up at night. This is a case that keeps us up at night.
The alleged motive, revenge for the deadly attacks on 2 mosques in New Zealand.
There's no question that the territorial defeat of the Islamic State, such as it was, is a huge step forward. But talk of the Islamic State as a terrorist group being defeated is extremely premature.
And expert Matthew Levitt warns there is a separate resurgence of al-Qaeda to grapple with too. It comes on the heels of the deadly shooting at a California synagogue and a thwarted plot at National Harbor near Washington, D.C., where a man allegedly planned to drive this stolen van through a sidewalk of pedestrians. Part of the problem, an old one but still overwhelming, recruiting and inspiring over the internet.
Doesn't this sound a bit like a broken record? Haven't we been talking about how the spread of social media allows for the spread of terror?
Well, unfortunately, what's routine as a conversation piece doesn't mean that it's something that we've solved as a social or a national security issue. The fact is that terrorists still are able to exploit the use of the internet. They move from different platforms and they're still able to communicate.
And now a rare but recent appearance by Islamic State leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, many thought was dead. The FBI worries it could inspire the same way Osama bin Laden used videos during the Afghanistan war.
And that was Chief Political Correspondent Scott Thuming. But coming up next, former Virginia Congressman Jim Moran and former Maryland Governor Bob Ehrlich join us. And ahead, a segment we call Balls and Strikes, where we give the mainstream media a seat at this table. This week, NPR's David Folkenflik, host of On Point, explains why Democrats will continue to investigate all things Trump. We'll be right back.
The difference simply by their love of the green and gold. The Packers, along with the Atlanta Falcons and Seattle Seahawks, were chosen to take part in the Fan Fearlessly campaign put on by American Family Insurance. The project asked fans to send photos of themselves dressed in their tailgating accessories. Every fan submission earned money for their chosen charities. The Packers selected the new community shelter in Green Bay, which helps adults become more self-sufficient. Shelter officials say the check for $20,000 that was presented today will go a long way.
A donation of this size, which supports our programming for the shelter, is amazing. One of the primary things that we spend money on in programming is barrier reduction. Somebody may need a pair of black pants for their new job, or work boots, steel-toe boots, anything that might be in their way that would prevent them from succeeding.
And if you'd like to help the shelter, there are plenty of volunteer opportunities. We have a link on fox11online.com. Just click on the menu at the top left, then look for this story under Local.
Roanoke woman says American Airlines lost her dog. She says she was flying from San Francisco to Raleigh, but her dog ended up in Philly.
That could be unnerving for a pet mom. ABC 13's Cynthia Beasley was there for the reunion after the dog was gone for more than 30 hours. The last time Amber Dalton saw her dog was 7:30 a.m. yesterday in San Francisco.
Hey, buddy. Hey. Are you okay?
Dalton and her dog Beast were supposed to arrive at Raleigh-Durham Airport at about 7 o'clock last night, but only one of them made it.
Get to Raleigh and I go to look for my pet in the oversized baggage, and there's no pets arriving.
Dalton says an hour later, American Airlines employees told her they didn't know where her dog was.
How can you not know where you put the dog? It's a live animal.
Dalton says she thinks the confusion started when they were about to leave the San Francisco airport. They were supposed to fly to Chicago, then Raleigh-Durham.
When I got to board, they pulled me out of line.
At that point, it was my baby, and I was making a decision as to whether or not to make it public. And I effectively overrode the regulations, used discretion to lean as far forward as I could to make that public. And it was my decision how and when to make it public, not Bob Mueller's.
Attorney General Barr testifying before Congress on the Mueller report, now going head-to-head here. Former Virginia Congressman Jim Moran and former Maryland Governor Bob Ehrlich. Topics, my friend. Let's start with that comment right there, Bob. It was his baby. Not only is it his baby, it's also the law, or at least policy.
It was the law. This is a circus, and the bottom line is he comported with, as he said, he went further than he actually had to. The big story of yesterday was all about, I guess, the special counsel's frustration with how the press reported, which is not the Attorney General's problem.
Joe, what do you
outside his jurisdiction.
What do you make of Barr's decision not to testify in front of the House after spending, a full day testifying in front of the Senate?
If the roles were reversed and this were the Obama administration,
And the Attorney General said, I'm not going to testify. And the President said, and my people aren't going to testify. You and the Republican Party would go bananas. You don't do that. It shows total disrespect for the Congress and for the Constitution.
Bob,
frankly.
I agree. I think politics is blood sport.
I
remember thinking, wow, if the shoe were on the other foot, when President Obama was doing some of the things, and those on the right, me included, were holding to the task and thinking, wow, if this ever switches.
I mean, look at the Benghazi hearings when nothing came out of it.
Wow, this is where we disagree. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, we're supposed to disagree.
I do not wholly disagree with my former colleague, by the way, but it is blood sport, and this is just, again, this is what we're going to see. This is the circus. This is post-Mueller. We have to make something out of pretty much nothing. And that's what we're going to see, as you know, for the next week, the next month, all the way through the lead up to 2020.
Joe, let me ask you this, and this is absolutely baffling to me. If the Mueller report said there is no Russian collusion, and they didn't have enough evidence to call it obstruction of justice, how in the world are the Democrats still wasting our time and money trying to investigate something that has no proven crime?
But you're mischaracterizing what the Mueller report did, Eric. He understood that there is an opinion within the OGC, the Attorney General's office, that you can't convict a president, you can't indict a president, and so there's no point in even trying to. But he laid out instances that may have represented collusion, and he laid out at least 9 instances where there was obstruction of justice. And if back in the Clinton days, even the Nixon days, those definitions apply.
He laid out 10 instances, not that were examples of
attempted.
He laid out examples of frustration of the President of the United States obstructing a non-crime. Not only a non-crime collusion, but a non-crime that didn't exist according to the bottom line of the report.
He tried to fire people because they weren't doing his bidding.
Well,
he wanted somebody like Bill Barr, who is doing his bidding, who mischaracterized the contents of the Mueller report so as to suck up to his boss. And and now he has a head start.
That's not what Mueller said.
He shaped the narrative.
That is not what Mueller said.
So that when people finally read 448 pages, if anybody does it, it's too late because the public has a
Mueller's
narrative.
frustration was not a function of Barr mischaracterizing the report. It was a frustration of how the press reported it.
Joe, let me ask you, and I don't mean to be beating up on you, Joe, but honestly, look, I intend to cross the street against the light, and that would be jaywalking, right? But if I never do it, and I talk someone into telling people that I was going to do it, but I didn't do it, how is that a crime? And that's basically what you're saying.
It's not
it was
a good
a crime
analogy.
that he was trying to obstruct justice when no justice was going to be served.
The fact that Don McGahn and other people in the administration chose to obey the law when the president told them to do otherwise doesn't mean that the president is
Bob, let me
guiltless.
ask you this.
It means the president attempted to obstruct justice.
Put the shoe on the other foot. Attempted murder or planning to kill your wife is also a crime, even if you don't do it.
It is, except there's no underlying crime here, nor there was a plan. There was a series of events where the president expressed his frustration with the non-events that were the predicate to this whole darn thing. If that's obstruction of justice, we have a big problem.
Well, I'm glad you used that example because there are a number of people in prison who attempted to have people killed, who tried to contract with them. The contract killer decided not to go through with it, or other people don't go through with it. But the attempt to commit murder is, in fact, a crime.
The attempt to commit murder, which is a crime.
The attempt to obstruct justice, as far as I'm concerned, is a crime. Now, but we're not even looking at crime, because impeachment is not about criminal activity.
Is the obstruction of justice not tied to the collusion case part of it? Because if Mueller has concluded there was no collusion, then there's no justice to be served.
So was having sex with an intern part of the original charges, which it seems to me were about Whitewater? So they went everywhere they wanted to go, and finally they found something.
It was about perjury. It wasn't about sex with an intern.
Collusion was no underlying crime to begin with, period. Attempted murder is.
All right, let's do this. One of the other big topics of the week has been Venezuela. It's falling apart. It's breaking down. Yeah. your thoughts on Venezuela and what we should be doing. Are we doing things right there, or are we doing things wrong?
Well, I'm supposed to be debating, but I suspect I'm going to agree with my friend Bob on this. Socialism doesn't work, certainly not Maduro's brand of socialism. People are suffering. That is, at this point, it's an illegitimate government. The reason why the military is still on board with Maduro is because they're getting paid off, because they're part of a corrupt kleptocracy, if you will, and they're also intimidated. But we've got to be very careful. If we tell Juan Guaido's people to revolt, we've got to have their back, because if that revolt fails,
Bob,
our allies are going to pay a steep price.
I'm going to give you the last word, but Bob, I have to ask you, didn't Obama replace someone in Libya and do exactly what Joe recommends we not do?
Correct, but I associate myself with the words of my colleague here. I think the president has ratcheted up the pressure. He's done the right thing. I don't think there's a hue and cry, Jim, from the Congress or from the country with regard to military intervention. No. I think there is, though, a hue and cry with regard to humanitarian concerns, doing what we've done, ratchet up the pressure on this illegitimate regime. I think the president's done a great job in that regard.
I would have to leave you here.
It's bipartisan.
I disagree with both of you guys. I think when we replace a dictator, we run the risk of replacing a dictator with another dictator. We don't know Guaido any more than we knew Maduro.
But we're not replacing. We're not invading.
Well, we've already backed Guaido over Maduro.
He's the best we have.
The duly elected
best
president.
Best of the worst. All right, got to leave it right there, guys. Coming up after the break, NPR's David Folkenflik weighs in on the ongoing protests in Venezuela as we talk balls and strikes. Stay with us.
This week on Full Measure, we investigate the billions in tax money spent on nuclear energy boondoggles. Plus, a scenic trip to Butte, Montana, where they're debating one of the most complicated and expensive environmental cleanups in the U.S. And an overhaul of the National Flood Insurance Program that will lower payments for some and raise them for others. I'm Cheryl Atkinson. Those stories and more this week on Full Measure.
A must-see show, Full Measure with Cheryl Atkinson, airs Sunday mornings at 10 on ABC 7 in Washington. For more information on what time it airs in your hometown, log on to fullmeasure.news.
But first, new details about the deadly shooting at UNC Charlotte that left 2 people dead and 4 others hurt. We now know that one of the victims killed was a local man from Waynesville. A candlelight vigil for the victims will be held tonight. Meanwhile, all campus activities have been suspended through the weekend. News 13's Liz Birch spent the morning on the UNCC campus and has the latest.
We've just learned the names of the people who died in this shooting. According to the UNC chancellor, there are 19-year-old Ellis Parlier and 21-year-old Riley Howell. We know Howell was a T.C. Robertson graduate, and he has a Waynesville address. We are working to learn more about him right now. On campus today, although the lockdown is lifted, campus activities, including finals, are suspended. The Kennedy building where the shooting happened is closed while the FBI and local police departments investigate. We've seen police here turning people away who are approaching the building. There's certainly a somber mood as so many mourn the loss of their classmates. We spoke with a freshman and a sophomore who were here despite their finals being canceled because they wanted to study. They just left campus last night when they learned there was an active shooter on campus.
Our teacher let us out early, so we would have been here if she didn't let us out early. So both of us kept.
And now let's talk balls and strikes. By the way, my favorite segment of the show. I'm joined by NPR media correspondent David Folkenflik. David, thanks for joining us. And as you know, this is all balls and strikes. Just give us the facts. Not looking for opinion, but a lot going on with AG Barr on the Hill testifying from the Senate panel today. What are you hearing? What do you know?
Well, what you're seeing is a bunch of very skeptical questioning from Senate Democrats who aren't buying what the Attorney General is selling. They certainly weren't particularly persuaded by what the Attorney General had to say in his characterization of Special Counsel Bob Mueller's report. And then they aren't particularly swayed by the way in which he characterized their interaction subsequent about it. You know, last night we learned that Special Counsel had actually written a letter objecting to the way in which, in the Special Counsel's terms, the substance and nature and context of the report had been presented by the Attorney General himself. The Attorney General had characterized that as being concerns about the way in which the news media had interpreted and analyzed the distinctions perhaps between the two. You've seen some pretty sharp questioning up on Capitol Hill, and I think that you're going to see an even more intense version of that from House Democrats when there's questioning from the Judiciary Committee tomorrow in the House of Representatives.
But going forward, David, let's say, what is the end goal for the Democrats? Let's talk about what the end goal for the White House is as well, with all these investigations and hearings going on and on.
Well, you've got a couple of different ideas. One is that the idea that's, baked into our constitutional system, one of oversight. Democrats want to be sure that they tease out certain kinds of things that, for example, the special counsel said he couldn't get at. Perhaps they could shed light on some of those knots that are still tangled. Perhaps they could sharpen attention to some of the corners that they want more light cast upon. And then there's the political question of the opposition that essentially the House Democrats form because they are the only part of the government controlled by the Democrats at the moment, not simply leading up to the 2020 elections, although that's real, but also in terms of the Trump presidency, which could endure should he win a second term. And there's a very delicate dance there for Democrats. Obviously, the ultimate question could be one of impeachment. A majority of Democrats want that very much. It was shown in a poll released this morning by NPR and some of its partners, and yet the majority of Americans are not ready for that or embracing of that. And so you've got a delicate dance for Democrats where their progressive wing and their core, their majority of the party wants that. The House Democrats have to decide whether they want to lead with something as confrontational as something that could lead with impeachment or simply say we're doing oversight actions here, which is what they're doing, in which the president is in a number of ways pushing back on, rejecting the legitimacy of and refusing to comply with on a number of fronts.
Venezuela is heating up. The riots, there's blood in the streets. I've literally seen for the first time ever a tank running over a citizen of that same country. What is the White House doing? Are they making the right moves? And let me preempt this with, I think John Bolton has made a massive mistake doing what he's doing in Venezuela. But what's the White House feel about what's going on in Venezuela?
I don't know as of today what they're intending to do. I want to be very clear on that. I do think you've seen striking images of essentially Venezuelans being run down by members of their own National Guard, their own military, effectively, in tanks. And that was a reason CNN, I believe some others, were knocked off the air after showing footage of that. It was quite striking. It does build to pressure upon the administration to intervene, perhaps on the side of Guaido, who's declared himself the sort of president of the country.
My question is why, and again, this may venture into the opinion side, which I don't want to do. The beauty of this segment is let's do straight facts. But what do we gain from backing a challenger to a dictator?
Well, you can say, if you believe that the elections were fraudulent, you can say this is ultimately a result that needs to happen. I do think that there's very, grave concerns. Once you are involved in an intervention and a coup, as in a sense Colin Powell once said, you kind of own it. Yeah. We saw that in Vietnam. We've seen that in other places. And so the question is the extent to which America is willing to get dragged into the internal politics of Venezuela.
We're going to leave it right there. David Folkenflik, thank you very much. NPR, everybody.
You bet.
And please don't forget to join us again next week. We'll have Anthony Scaramucci on The Big Show. Also, next Tuesday, First Lady Melania Trump asked me to speak at her Be Best conference. I accepted with high honor. I'll share the highlights from that next week.